Hello team, welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MS Pearce. Ukraine more news update, third part thereof for the 29th of November 2024. I'm in quite a jolly mood today, even though we're talking about very serious and at times horrific things. Jolly is probably the wrong word. I'm just in a bit of a better place. I think it's very interesting what's going on geopolitically concerning Ukraine, and there are, I think, elements of hope that I wasn't expecting to have, and I think that's because reality bites. I honestly think things might change in the US. It's not to talk about how Trump is going to be some savior because he's got the right idea in his heart and this will to do what is right, because I think just reality is bitten, whereby hopefully the evidence of what is actually going on in Ukraine is going to take hold amongst the decision makers in the White House, and the rationale for why the US has been helping. Like, it would be really weird to see the US helping Ukraine for almost 3 years, and then for the incoming government to come in and say, well, the Pentagon and the DoD were just completely wrong. There was absolutely no reason for you to be helping Ukraine. All our money has been going to waste. That money has been spent precisely because the evidence is there to suggest that that's the right thing to do for the US, and it's in the US's international interests. And it's easy to be on the outside shouting in and saying, oh, a load of rubbish, you don't know what you're doing. That's very easy for any opposition party and leader to do. But when you actually get that intel yourself and get a solid understanding of what's going on, I think it can change things. And I'm really hopeful that, against the prejudgment of many of those in the MAGA community, that reality will bite. And what's going to be interesting is to see if that happens. And I'm hopeful. It might not happen. We might get to this real Russian appeasement situation, and all the worst worries that I had might still happen. But if you get a pivot from Trump to assist Ukraine, which is what hopefully we all hope, what's going to be interesting is seeing what the people just kind of sort of directly around Trump, as in his own children, like Donald Trump Jr., Tucker Carlson, you will have cognitive dissonance reduction, or cognitive dissonance going on, which is, I've got this core belief that helping Ukraine is the wrong thing and pro-Russian, blah, blah, blah. So someone like Tucker Carlson. And then also within that belief is that everything about Trump is amazing and correct, and MAGA and Republicanism in its modern iteration is what I believe. So all of this is wrapped up. And then you get the situation whereby Trump and his advisors in the know change their position, which is evidence that you were wrong on Ukraine. So as Tucker Carlson, this was my core belief. Trump is right and Ukraine is corrupt and wrong, and helping Ukraine is the wrong thing to do. And that's wrapped up with Trump being right, because Trump has kind of advocated for that. Now Trump has pivoted. Where does that leave my core belief, given the evidence that he's pivoted, because there is good rationale to suggest that helping Ukraine is the right thing to do for the US? So there's going to be some really if that happens, how do people like Donald Trump, Tucker Carlson, Elon Musk, who's right at the center of it, David Sachs, all these people, and people even on my threads, America's First Patriots, saying, actually this is the right thing to do, blah blah blah, going down the MAGA route, and then we'll have to pivot as well, like seemingly wanting to support Ukraine, but then saying actually it's all over, blah blah blah, it's not really in Americans, going down that MAGA route and having to pivot. If Trump pivots, most of the low information voters will pivot, but you've got, I would call them low information. I'd say someone like Elon Musk is a low information, as he's ignorant of the details that he needs to know. So, but those much more low information but very high propensity, they're very high influence people, how are they going to react? It's going to be fascinating. We're going to go to Georgia first. So much has been happening in Georgia. So the opposition has called for mass protests outside of Parliament yesterday evening. They've been continuing. Protests erupted after the decision to delay the EU integration talks until after 2028, with brutal crackdowns, injuries and detentions being reported. So there are some huge scenes coming out of Tbilisi, but actually many of the other big cities or larger towns in Georgia saw also protests taking place. So it's not just a kind of elitist metropolitan thing. In Tbilisi, security forces are using water cannons and tear gas to disperse protesters outside the parliament building. And then lots of footage that you can see in various places next to reports that at a protest in front of the parliament against the suspension of European integration, the police used force against protesters. The Interior Ministry used special means against protesters and pepper spray, water cannons, batons. Police threw smoke bombs into the crowd of demonstrators. There were clashes with them. More than 30 police officers were injured. More than 43 people were detained at the protest in Tbilisi. Georgian police trying to push back protesters and beating up those that are being caught. Across the country, tens of thousands have gathered and protests are growing. That's what you want to see. You don't want the police with their heavy-handed tactics to have an effect of dissipating any kind of protest. It's going to be hard and it will be harsh and people will be beaten and people will be detained. But in this fight for democracy against rigged elections, you just hope that freedom prevails. Now, right now, it says all translated, Georgian police, this was last night, are unsuccessfully trying to disperse a just protest against rigged elections using water cannons, while a fierce clash is unfolding between protesters and cops near the parliament. I wouldn't even say they were cops. You've got riot police. You probably got is it Tutushki, the kind of paid up thugs as well, helping out, no doubt. In Tbilisi, says Tim White, a host of big political hitters have joined the people's protest. Former Prime Minister and ex-Interior Minister of Internal Affairs, Georgi Gakaria, fourth President of Georgia, Georgi Margvelashvili, and current President Salome Zurabishvili have been outside Parliament. So that's really good news there. Tim White then adds, it's impossible to take your eyes off Georgia at the moment. It's a pity I can only attach one video at a time here, but 4 videos I really want you to see. The organic protests continue to start to turn a little violent in Tbilisi. Lots of pretty hardcore videos. The organic protests continue in Georgia and started to turn violent. After minor confrontation with Georgia's police, protesters in central Tbilisi erect makeshift barricades. That gives you a sense of the Euromaidan feel. Where it became difficult for the police to get too close and break up these people because there were literal physical things between the police and the protesters. Not long ago, a fire was started on Rostaveli Street in the centre of Tbilisi. Georgia's police extinguished it with a water cannon. So lots happening in Georgia. We'll keep a close eye on that. Tim White adds today, following last night's violent scenes on the streets of Georgia, the country's ambassador in Bulgaria has resigned. The tide may be turning against the pro-Russian oligarchy, which stole the election. So the ambassador says, with this public statement, I am announcing that I've submitted my resignation as the ambassador of Georgia to Bulgaria. Throughout my extensive diplomatic service, more than 2 decades, I've been actively engaged with my fellow colleagues in advancing Georgia's Euro-Atlantic and EU integration process and building a solid and trustful strategic partnerships with our allies, especially with the US. Our tireless efforts shouldn't be undermined by or compromised by any means. No to violence against free will of peaceful protesters. Full solidarity. So the ambassador stepping back because he's been involved in EU integration discussions and processes for a long time, and then obviously, with the postponement of those negotiations till after 2028, in other words, kicking it to the long grass completely, he's stepped back in protest, and I think that's really powerful. Tim White says, I posted many videos of demonstrations from Georgia towards the end of yesterday's thread. Well worth checking them out if you haven't done so. We just looked at some of those and you can look at them in more detail. I won't show too many pretty grim things, but unfortunately but predictably, the government thugs turned to violence, particularly against journalists. And this is the Georgian journalist who was severely beaten while doing his job by the police forces of the pro-Russian regime in Georgia. journalists reporting on that being beaten, controlling the press, controlling the narrative, of course, that's incredibly important for autocratic regimes. And speaking of which, it's the old narrative thread going on here. So, Kyiv Independent reports that in this week's edition, Alexander Lukashenko threatens to shut down the internet in Belarus should protests occur during the 2025 presidential election. Meanwhile, 38 Russian combat drones entered Belarus between November 24th and 5th, which I reported before, but it's his first bit. So Lukashenko wanting to or threatening to shut down the internet. The internet is so important. It's important for spreading information, of course, spreading the reality about a given information. So if you're in Georgia, it's a way of spreading the truth about the rigging of the Georgian elections, but also it's a way of communicating and a way of coalescing physically. The internet has been, with different apps being used at different times, has been a way that people have been able to say, right, we're meeting here at this time, you guys need to be there, sending out messages on Signal or Telegram or WhatsApp or whatever. It's the way to mobilize. Lukashenko, very cleverly, you could argue, has a handle of that on that and says, look, if we're going to have similar issues in the next election, and remember his last election was rigged and he was only put in place by his benefactor Putin. He is a dictator at the behest of Putin, but he knows full well that if you put a free and fair democratic vote to the people of Belarus, he would not be in charge after the next election, and so therefore he needs to control the population so that they are pliable, malleable, or they are they are disenfranchised. And one way of doing that is to take away their access to the internet. Now, Jackson Hinkle, who is that despicable human being, American chap who supports all that which is not great around the world, has shown that he supports the Romanian pro-Russian candidate, Călin Georgescu. As this source says, the fact that Hinkle supports him should be enough proof for anyone to never elect this dude. May God guide Romania to glory, says Jackson Hinkle, with a picture of Georgescu. Now, there have been protests in Romania. The Romanians have been protesting, quote, Putin, take your paws off Romania, says that long placard, that long banner, sorry. And they've been out protesting as well. So it's great to see people trying to take political power into their hands for what is good and right in their country. They hopefully won't be kowtowed by either autocracy directly, as in Lukashenko or Georgia, but the prospect of autocracy and the prospect of dancing to the Russian tunes. Okay, now on the FSB officer behind the pro-Russian billboards in Italy, from Anton Shekovstov, one of the best informed experts on covert Russian political campaigns. Okay, so this is a Euromaidan press. We have heard previously, I've reported that there have been these billboards going up in Italy that have been overtly pro-Russian. And, kind of what's going on there. Italy is one of these countries that is, on the face of it, supportive of Ukraine. But actually, a lot of that was put in place by Draghi before he left being in charge of Italy. Then Giorgia Meloni took over with the coalition government, and even though she has been strong in her rhetorical support, at least for Italy, she has been curtailed, I think, by the coalition partners. Both the other two staunch right-wing parties have close ties to Russia, so La Liga and is it Forza Italia. So she is in a difficult position, Giorgia Meloni, and Italy seems to be a prime target for Russian propaganda, which you can see from these huge billboards that are going up here and there, and other things going up around Italy. So in September, a pro-Russian billboard campaign appeared across Italian cities featuring the slogan, "Russia is not our enemy," alongside an image of an Italy-Russia handshake. The billboards called for an end to funding of weapons for Ukraine and Israel, with some, including those seen in Rome, adding the message, "Enough money for weapons for Ukraine and Israel. We want peace and we reject war." Ukraine's embassy in Italy responded quickly in the campaign, saying that it was deeply concerned by the arrogance of the Russian propaganda in the Eternal City, i.e. Rome, and asking that Rome local authorities reconsider granting permits for such posters that have a clear purpose of rehabilitating the image of the aggressor state. CNN alleged that an Italian group called Sovranità Popolare, Popular Sovereignty, claimed responsibility for the campaign by posting a lengthy article on its website. The group cited Article 11 of the Italian constitution, emphasizing Italy's rejection of war as a means of aggression and its commitment to promoting peace and justice among nations. The Sovranità Popolare also accused warmongers among Italian politicians and media of fueling fear and Russophobia since Russia's invasion of Ukraine, hinting at a deliberate incitement of hatred towards Russian people, culture and art. However, the Sovranità Popolare itself, although avowedly pro-Russian, denied it was responsible for the billboard campaign across Italy, adding that even if the billboards were to be removed from Italian streets, the campaign would continue through other means. Coccia questioned whether Agliotti financed the campaign independently or received external support. This is an investigation into Massimiliano Coccia revealed that it was an Italian anti-vax, anti-5G and pro-Putin activist Domenico Agliotti, also the former city council of Rome, who coordinated the campaign. Interesting how conspiracy theorists are often in the same camp as pro-Russian people as well. That kind of thinking seems to be closely aligned. It's almost like anti-establishment. Like, is anti-US imperialism, anti-establishment, normal politicians would support Ukraine. We want to be anti that in the same way that we want to be anti-corporations and their kind of telecoms corporations and the 5G phone mast. They're responsible for that, and anti-vax and big pharma. There are issues with big pharma, but I think that broadly speaking, those kind of movements are problematic, to say the least. Agliotti claimed that the campaign was crowdfunded and criticised Rome's authorities for not removing the ads despite Russia's aggression against Ukraine. So, who's funding these campaigns? The pro-Russian billboard campaign in September mirrored a similar effort from the past summer. Moreover, while both Sovranità Popolare and Domenico Agliotti denied any connection to Russia, evidence suggests that the summer campaign can, in fact, be linked to actual Russian operatives. This article goes on to make those connections. I won't read it all to you, but we'll go and find the most pertinent parts. Now, there are some interesting nuggets. So La Liga is one of the coalition parties at the moment in control of Italy, and Matteo Salvini is the leader of the party, and he is, as deputy PM at the moment, he is very much pro-Russian. So the extent of Russia's influence on pro-Russian decisions made in Italy is made apparent in intercepted emails provided to the author of this article by a trusted source. In 2018, Stovbun, so some chap that's been previously mentioned, apparently played a certain role in the Verona City Council's decision to deprive Ukraine's President Petro Poroshenko of the title of honorary citizen of Verona. In his report to a senior authority in August 2018, Stovbun wrote the following, and then you've got this account that actually Matteo Salvini and La Liga and Five Stars, another party, were involved in revoking Poroshenko's title as honorary citizen of Verona. It was indeed revoked, and so you've got this very at times I think subtle, at times more overt influence of Russia in Italian politics, and it happens in a number of places. This is kind of Verona locality rather than being a national thing, but the influence is really obviously, I think, there. But yes, so let's go on. So this chap Stobum we heard about previously, Alexei Stobum, is a Russian FSB officer, a handler of assets like Eliseo Bertolazzi, an Italian who is basically pro-Russian. FSB operative Stobum handled Kremlin agents also beyond Italy, connections to Latvia and elsewhere, so on and so forth. So really good article here that goes into the long weeds of the influence operations within Italy. So those two previous people were known as writer and erudite, and you have these three other people who I think are unnamed. Evidence from other confidential reports written by Stofman, who is erudite, call sign erudite, suggests that he has also handled other assets: lawyer in the Czech Republic, doctor in Uzbekistan, financier in Latvia, and it's just this. This idea that Russia appeared to have been, it's not even an idea, it's obvious that Russia have been incredibly active with espionage throughout Europe for some time and have great success in what they've been doing. They are undermining free and fair elections, and they are doing things from, going full bore in sort of blowing things up and assassinating people, right down to influence campaigns and billboards and so on and so forth. And we can take this across now to some Bulgarians operating on behalf of Russia as well. So new details are coming to light of 3 Bulgarian spies arrested in the UK working for Russia. Jan Marsalek, yes, the Wirecard guy. So if you remember, in Austria, you had real compromise of Austrian politicians and people up with a laptop going missing, wasn't it? And a mobile phone, I believe anyway, the guy all connected to the guy in charge of Wirecard, and huge amounts of espionage. Wirecard is a company. Directed them to spy on Christo Grozev, and even considered murdering him and kidnapping him and whisking him away to Moscow. So this is now coming to a head as this is going through court in the UK. So Bulgarian nationals allegedly surveilled targets, including a journalist linked to Russian dissident Alexei Navalny. A sophisticated UK-based spy ring passed secrets to Russia for nearly 3 years and gathered information on targets across Europe, a court has heard. 3 Bulgarian nationals, Katerina Ivanova, Vanya Gabarova and Teomir Ivanchev, allegedly carried out surveillance on individuals and places of interest to Russia. Among those said to have been targeted were an award-winning Bulgarian journalist who worked with the late Russian opposition dissident Alexei Navalny. The journalist was allegedly the subject of discussions about killing or kidnapping him and taking him to Moscow. Other alleged discussions concerned the deployment of 2 female defendants in a honey trap ploy to capture more information. This is a part that lots of people are reporting on at the moment today. It's going all over the socials. Alison Morgan KC, opening the case for the prosecution on Thursday, said, quote, over a period of nearly 3 years, they sought to gather information for the benefit of Russia, an enemy of the UK, information about various targets, both people and physical locations, information of particular interest to the Russian state. Their activity caused obvious and inevitable prejudice to the safety and interests of the United Kingdom. Okay, so we are in a position, like I said yesterday, we are involved in World War III. People might not realise it, but we are. This is a cyber war. This is an economic war. This is an information war. This is a political war. This is a conventional war in Ukraine. That's a manifestation of it in Ukraine. But we are fighting against Russia. Russia's doing all these things. There are potentially, I don't know if they have found connections, but there are presently even another base today or yesterday, and another military base in the UK has had drones flying above it. We've got undersea cables being cut by a Chinese ship with a Russian captain that appears to be almost certainly nefarious. We are having places catch on fire or blow up. We've had Deal in a defense manufacturer. One of their plants in Germany was on fire. We've had arsenals in Bulgaria blow up, literally the arsenal. Munitions plant in Bulgaria blow up, and another couple of incidents there. We've got Czechia, we've got France in the run up to the Olympics. All of these things are taking place, and at some point we have to ask the question whether has Article 5 been triggered? Have Russia done enough to warrant us taking more direct action against Russia. Tim White here says Russia is waging a, quote, staggeringly reckless sabotage in Europe, and that is what Britain's top spy has said. Richard Moore, head of the MI6, said if Putin succeeds in Ukraine, our security, British, French, European and transatlantic, will be jeopardized, as reported in Reuters. So I think this is a really important time, and we can start joining all the dots here, really. MI6's Moore accuses Russia of nuclear saber-rattling to scare Western countries off backing Ukraine. He warns of global risks if Russia's war in Ukraine goes unchecked. And with Trump soon to return to the White House, he stresses the need for Western unity against Russia, Iran and North Korea. Things are getting serious. And going back to my position on Trump, I reckon there are some truths that are being told to Trump right now. And I'm going to bring this to the next thing I say, because actually this fits into my narrative arc here, is that now the head of MI6 is being considered as Sakir Starmer's new man in Washington. So this guy we're just hearing about, Richard Moore, the Sun tabloid reveals that he may be the next UK ambassador to Washington. So that's a really interesting choice, because here's someone who frickin' knows his onions about what's going on in the international information and cybersphere, and also conventional warfare and intelligence, etc., etc. Like, what a very clever choice to put as UK ambassador to the US at a time where the incoming administration needs to know what's going on. You've got someone, at least the UK, from a UK's point of view, here is someone who most knows what's going on, down underneath, the radar, with all the espionage and all the things that Russia are doing, and China, etc., etc. Let's put him as our point man in Washington to be the go-between between the UK and the US. Like, I think there is no coincidence here when we are hearing all of the reality of what Russia is doing to undermine all of our nations around Europe and the US. And I think there's a day of reckoning coming from the Trump administration, where they either had to grapple with this or they get subsumed by it. You either say, yeah, this is a problem. I know they helped us get into power. I know that Russia wanted Trump in, and he wanted our campaign. If I'm talking from Trump's point of view, I know he's helped us get in. But at the end of the day, I'm now being presented with enough evidence to recognize that thanks for helping us, but actually you guys suck and you're not good for the US's national interests. And so actually you've backed us, but you have made your calculations wrong, Putin, because now we're going to do you over. That's what I hope will happen. Now, in an interview with, just to go forward in terms of moving on from the US point of view, although we're going to come back to the US, Daily Telegraph has, or the Daily Telegraph's podcast, Ukraine the Latest, and I talked about this in the last video, has had Boris Johnson on talking about how, as a peacekeeping initiative, if there are these negotiations that are going to take place, and if there's going to be a kind of demilitarized zone or whatever situation is, UK troops are likely to be involved in peacekeeping missions in Ukraine. We talked about this yesterday. There will be huge costs involved, and you almost want Ukraine to win out in the war, because actually that's probably going to be a cheaper way of bringing the war to an end than having huge numbers of European troops stationed in Ukraine. The right populist German party Alternative für Deutschland, AfD, Alternative for Germany, is in its final draft of the election programme insists on Germany's withdrawal from the European Union, Spiegel reported citing a document. Okay, this is super troubling, but it's unsurprising. These right-wing parties are usually ultra-nationalistic or nationalistic, and therefore want their own kind of sovereignty as opposed to some kind of federalised idea of what the country should be in terms of the European Union. And so AfD looks like they're much more formally going to be going for a kind of Brexit for Germany, Gerexit. And this is exactly what Putin would want. I mean, this is Putin's wet dream, is like, oh my goodness, all of Europe falls apart. The EU, which is trying to hold us to account, is undermined by all of these right-wing nationalist movements, and we are going to be funding them and fomenting their discontent with the status quo, etc., etc. This is exactly what Putin wants. So it's really, really important, as far as I'm concerned, that the EU remains united, remains a thing, and you don't have other nations going through Brexit. I mean, first of all, it's cost us a lot, and people won't like this, but OBR has come out and others have said, the cost of the UK economy has been pretty vast for leaving Brexit, for leaving the EU. Sorry, if Germany does that, it is interesting because you had a lot of Eurosceptic parties, like, for example, Rassemblement National and Marine Le Pen, and indeed Geert Wilders, recognizing, in fact, I think Wilders said something like this, the idea that Nexit was going to be a thing, the Netherlands leaving the EU. They were looking to the UK doing that, and we're going to say, look, we can do that too. Look how good that's been. And if you're a Brexiteer, a Leaver, a British voter who voted Leave, you might not like to hear this, but this was a reality of what happened, is that in Europe, Brexit has been seen as a failure, right? You may think it's brilliant or whatever. Yeah, well done, we've got out of Europe. But actually, it's been fairly universally been seen as a failure, and it's been seen to have cost us a lot of money. Financially. And so what happened is that Rassemblement National, as far as I understand it, and even Geert Wilders and his PVV said, okay, we're not going to leave the EU, but we just want to reform it and blah, blah, blah. So, because otherwise we're going to end up like that. So they pivoted somewhat to have a different approach rather than full-on Euroscepticism. It's interesting, the AfD are going full on leave the EU. I just think from a security point of view and from an economic point of view and for benefit of the world, I think the EU needs to remain as an entity. I feel quite strongly about that. Okay. Yeah, whether it's got the UK in or not. French aid to Ukraine reporting there's a couple of things that have been going on that shows a change in the geopolitical landscape. So although Russia is in a bit of trouble in Syria at the moment, whereby the rebels in Syria, and that's a complex civil war with 7 different entities or whatever fighting against the Assad regime there, and some of it is the enemy of my enemy is my friend type thing. You've got some of those rebel entities are not cool. It's like ISIS. No, we don't want to be on the side of ISIS, but we don't want to be on the side of Assad. And actually, we want to support the rebels, but then once they win, it's like, okay, we need to think about this because this could be a nightmare as well, type thing. Okay, so Russia in a bit of trouble in Syria. It's looking, but in the Sahel region of Africa, it appears that those kind of neo-colonial, or not the post-colonialism of France is being thrown off, right? French military bases are no longer welcome in Senegal now. So we've seen what's taken place in Mali and some of these other nations. The President of the Republic should relocate them ASAP to the eastern flank, especially in the Baltic states. Whether Senegal welcomes China or Russia is its choice, says French aid to Ukraine. But a clown. So I think that's trying to understand what's going on with Senegal. But it's not just there, it's Chad as well. So Chad's foreign minister has announced that the termination of defence cooperation agreements with France. The President of the Republic should respect Chad's sovereign decision ASAP and focus on the Baltic countries instead. Good luck with Russia or China. So French aid to Ukraine's position is the same for both those countries, which is, okay, pull that stuff out and whack it in to help out Ukraine. But actually, this is a giving up of power in the region really to Russia. Now, from these countries' point of view, this might be nice to get rid of France because they have been quite extractive and sort of colonial over, very much originally they were. But even since then, they've still had that legacy. So it's throwing off the shackles of France, but then at the same time welcoming in, maybe they like the tricolor of red, white and blue, they're welcoming in in Russia to do broadly the same thing. And Russia are going to be super extractive as well. Like, we're going to be in this for money and natural resources, don't really give a toss about you as an entity, as a nation. So the end result from an independent point of view, from an objective point of view, is you're just replacing France with Russia. So if anyone's going to be extractive there, I'd prefer it was France than Russia. I guess ideally no one, and they're independent as long as they've got free and fair elections. The problem is there's a really interesting connection between natural resources like oil and lack of democracy. It's fascinating. There's papers written on this I could share with you. That like the more natural resources you have, like oil, the less democratic your nation is likely to be. There's a couple that kind of go against that. So the US, although I'd say there's some problems with the democratic processes there, the very narrow democracy. You've also got Norway as well. But in terms of much, these large reserves of natural resources, you end up concentrating money in very small numbers of people, and you having dictatorships, or in the case of the Middle Eastern nations, they're not quite dictatorships, they're monarchies, which is broadly the same. Okay, right. Russians have started drinking Chinese beer with rice and seaweed. China's almost doubled its beer exports to Russia since the beginning of 2024. Supplies in monetary terms amounted to $25.5 million. It is noted that the beer with additives from rice, seaweed and herbs is in the greatest demand. At the same time, Russian beer exports to China fell by 20% to $13.6 million, despite the fact that the Russian Ministry of Agriculture had previously called China one of the most promising markets for Russian beer supplies. Interesting. So, kind of trade deficits and whatnot. This, I think, again, is another indication that Russia is just merely a vassal state of China these days. Right, moving very quickly on to American stuff. We have Putin wants to escalate before Trump takes office, according to Zelensky, as he hits back at the Russian threats of Putin. So Putin threatening Ukraine with all these the IRBM missile, intermediate range ballistic missile, and how that he's got a bunch of these that he can deploy, and they're going to make them at scale, and they're going to be so explosive, and you need to watch out, Ukraine. Zelensky saying he wants to escalate before Trump gets in. I've talked previously about how Trump might be pivoting, how there's evidence that could be the case. Not necessarily the case, we don't know yet, but it's looking somewhat more promising. Now, I probably don't have time to fully go through this. This is Victoria Spartz, who I know Greg Terry really likes. He's met her, but I think she's pivoted and gone full MAGA and gone anti-Ukraine as a Ukrainian American lawmaker. And it is quite depressing. So Born Ukrainian, says Noel Reports, moved to the US and started spouting pro-Russian nonsense ever since. US Congresswoman Victoria Spartz, born Ukrainian, talking utter nonsense about Zelensky not willing to protect his own people. This is so worrying, because actually this will fall on American ears in a way that, we've got a Ukrainian slagging off Ukraine, so actually that kind of MAGA position of Ukraine is correct, because here we've got a Ukrainian saying it, so it has to be right. I think it's just really, really dodgy, and I'm not a fan of hers at all. Now, this is brilliant, and I know this means the video is going to go on for a little bit, because this whole section on Ukraine was fascinating. This is the Restless Politics US podcast.
I think that the cartoon picture that emerged of Trump during the campaign is, he says he's going to sort out Ukraine in 24 hours. That means he's basically going to roll over to Vladimir Putin and give it away. And Zelensky will just have to suck it up, because the truth is, without the American money going in, there's no way that they can carry on with this war in the same way they've been fighting it. The Europeans aren't going to step up. So that was the kind of cartoon caricatured view. I was speaking to somebody who was at the G20 who said that Trump had been much more nuanced in a phone call that he'd had. He said that he thought that the situation in Ukraine had the capacity to become as complicated as the Middle East. Now, if that's right, is he already thinking that the 24-hour thing, that's just one of those figures of speech that nobody took seriously, don't need to worry about that? The kind of the mood music with Putin has been interesting, and the Russians, they didn't kind of celebrate Trump's second coming in the way that they celebrated the first coming. Now, deep down, I've got no doubt at all that they're very, very happy that he won rather than Kamala Harris. But I wonder if there's going to be something a little bit more unexpected in the way they deal with Ukraine. That could be my wishful thinking, but
I want to fortify that. He met with the incoming or the new president of NATO down at Mar-a-Lago. Sources are reporting back through the military that Trump is being way more nuanced. Inside the campaign, my friends are telling me Trump does not like I'm Putin's lackey. He hates that narrative. It drives him crazy.
Now, this is fascinating. So, and I can so believe this. So Trump apparently, his favorite newspaper is the New York Times. So he likes to read it because he hates it, and he likes to see his name across the top and blah blah blah. I think they mentioned this, but he's very thin-skinned, and he does take it badly if people are like, "Oh, you're just a lackey of Putin." And I think that's a really good approach to take if you're in opposition, to say things like that, because it will gee on Trump to fight against that and then try and be harsh against Putin to prove that he's not a lackey of Putin. And that's exactly what we want.
Crazy. I think he's been very fawning over Putin over the last 9 years that he's been in politics, but he's now 78. He won the popular vote in the largest economy with the biggest military. And he may not want to be Putin's lackey here. You may know this, and it's pretty well reported, that the night of the election, they were showing naked pictures. I guess, would it surprise you with Marco Rubio and
naked pictures of his wife, Melania,
in positions of more typical Republicans in terms of the way they lean on foreign policy, if the world is surprised about Trump's position on the Ukraine?
Where would you put Rubio in the kind of traditional Republican Party political spectrum? Where would he be?
He's energetic Jeb Bush. And so remember, Jeb Bush is his mentor. Jeb Bush helped him rise when he was governor of Florida. He was close to the Bush family. It got strained in 2016 when they were both running for president together. I think Jeb didn't like that. He thought Marco needed to take a back seat to him. But he's tight with Susie Wiles. Remember, she's a longtime political operative in Florida. She helped DeSantis get elected. She's the one that influenced and convinced Donald Trump to endorse DeSantis. That was a very close 2018 race. And so you're in a situation where these guys think like neocons. And what is a neocon? America's got might. America needs to flex on people to get them in line. Now, obviously, that wasn't successful in Afghanistan. Turned out that it wasn't successful in Iraq. But this is different. This is the European theater. And, I see Putin as a rationalist. So I don't see Putin as a madman. I see Putin as a rationalist. He wants to stay in power. He knows if he projects power outside of his country, it creates a lot of nationalism, and which, as a result of which, it creates popularity for him inside the country. He controls the media. When people go to war, Alistair, George Orwell, one of your most famous writers, people go to war. We're always at war. It creates nationalism. We both remember George Herbert Walker Bush out of the Gulf War with a 93% approval rating. Obviously, he went on to lose the election. Winston Churchill losing to Clement Attlee after the war's over. But Putin knows he's got to keep a war going. He's 72. He wants to stay in power till he dies, sees himself as a successor to Joe Stalin. But I don't see him as a madman. I don't see him deploying a nuke somewhere. I mean, if he does that, that would be a big...
This is an interesting point, because I think as well that Putin is a rational agent. I don't think he's irrational. It's just garbage in, garbage out. And if you start with the incorrect foundations, then you are going to make incorrect conclusions. But it's not that you're being irrational. You're being rational within the confines of your information space. And I think that's the issue for Putin.
Big shock. I know he's threatening to do that. What do you think?
I think on so far as this relates to Ukraine, that I don't think Trump will want this to be his first big foreign policy outcome, because I think it's very, very hard to see how he will project that as a success for him. Ending the war is not enough, because there are going to be consequences to that
Yeah.
that don't necessarily get played out in front of what you call your low information voters, but which are going to have big strategic consequences in Europe. And the sense that I was getting from this guy who'd spoken to Trump, the G20 leader, was that he was more onto that than maybe we thought, and that he's worried about the idea that his Ukraine becomes like Biden's Afghanistan. It sounds great, you ended it, but then there's absolute chaos and mess. The other thing I wanted to pick you up on something you said earlier, which I thought was really interesting. You said he hates the image of being Putin's lackey. If you were Zelensky, would you use that, or would you get others to use that? Or how would you, if that sort of really plays into him, how would you exploit that? Because it's kind of on that level that he operates, isn't it?
Trump is in a different place today. This is just me. He was nervous, Alistair. If it was November of 2016 and we were at Trump Tower, he was projecting confidence, but he was nervous because I can remember it. Okay, he was listening to people. He was concerned about the presidency. He was trying to follow the rules. When he got there and they were attacking him, again, I'm just taking it from his point of view. Okay. When they were attacking him, he was like, okay, I have to fight back. The special prosecutor, this, that, and the other thing. Now, weirdly, Joe Biden has made Donald Trump stronger with Trumpism and stronger with MAGA. How did he do that? He's had a 4-year break in the action to ruminate and stew about what he did wrong in Trump 1. And so now he's coming back into Trump 2 with a vengeance. But one of the things that he wants to do is he wants to stump Alastair Campbell, Anthony Scaramucci, and other pundits. He wants us to think he's going one way, and then through misdirection, he goes in a completely opposite direction just to shock people. There was a great scene in H.R. McMaster's book, which I'm still laughing about. I read H.R.'s book, and he said, so Tillerson and I were meeting with Trump. There was a problem in Venezuela. And we both looked at him. Okay, sir, we briefed you. Yes, I understand what to do. Yes, you're going to meet the press in 2 minutes. Yes. Okay, the one thing we do not want you to do, please don't say to the press that we have any military options on the table. We don't want to inflame the other leaders in South America. Trump gets to the microphone and says, I just want everybody to know we've got military options on the table.
We have options.
And this reflexive contrarianism. That's the description from H.R. McMaster that describes Trump. Whatever the general consensus is, he may just do the opposite for the sake of doing the opposite. That's literally...
I've talked to you before about how one of my children, he has his challenges, he has something called pathological demand avoidance. And it looks very similar to narcissistic personality disorder in some of its manifestations, some of its characteristics. And there are so many similarities. It's fascinating. And my son, both at school and at home, his pathological response, like it's not rational. It's pathological, physiological almost. Is that when he's asked or told to do something, his immediate reaction is no, and doing the opposite. And so it's trying to find ways around that. That's exactly, so saying that these two are similar and then saying, well, actually Trump seems to have, as part of his narcissistic personality disorder, possibly this element of like, you've told me to do this, I'm going to do the opposite. I think that's really fascinating. And it's like, you're the lackey of Putin. No, I'm not. I'm going to be the opposite of that. Like, I'm going to blow your expectations. You think I'm this? No. Pushing against that all the time because he wants to be the one in control.
How he thinks. He's not sitting there like Tony Blair or Bill Clinton and say, okay, I have a grand strategy. I'm going to bomb these areas of Kosovo. I'm not going to put any ground forces in. Hopefully it'll stop the ethnic cleansing, right? And here's my strategy. There's no thought behind it. It's a reflex. The other thing is if you're coming in with a thought and a strategy and he doesn't own it, He's not going to adopt it. He's not going to use it.
It's got to be my idea.
You have to go to him and say, here are the options. Here are 10 things that we should do. Here are the top 3 things, and then he picks it. Otherwise, he won't do it. I know it sounds childish, but I'm just telling you how that shit works, you know?
And the pictures, you have to have the pictures of him. With
You got to have pictures. You got pictures of him. You can't have pictures of him from the side because he looks really fat from the side. And we don't like pictures of himself from the side, but he likes pictures of himself from the front with the suit, tie, and the jacket hiding the belly. You know why you laugh at that, Alistair? Because you know what I'm saying is true. Right? I mean,
yeah, no, but what I'm going to ask you is, what will he be like when he's sort of looking at social media and he's seeing all these hilarious memes of him and Elon Musk either being in love or being married or being sumo?
So he then goes on. This is a really good section, but we don't have time. Go and watch this. The chat on Elon Musk is fascinating. Really, really good. But anyway, I think there are many reasons that we might be fairly upbeat about what may come to pass in the incoming administration and before then. So front loading loads of support for Ukraine now, as much as the Biden administration possibly can, and then Trump takes over, and then Putin's calculation could have been wrong. I do worry about Elon Musk, as it says, imagine the MAGA reaction if George Soros or Bill Gates were doing even 10% of what Elon Musk is doing. This is Elon Musk at Mar-a-Lago. So look at how much fun Trump is having here, and then slapping Elon Musk. I mean, Trump's son is not impressed, and it's just interesting to look at Trump there and how he puts his hand. He's loving a bit of Musk. I think Musk realizes how camp that song is and the heritage of that song. But anyway, I do worry about Musk and whether he will lead Trump astray in terms of Ukraine. Musk is getting involved in UK politics. He seems to be overtly shilling for Reform UK. He's getting involved in Irish politics today. He's starting to flex his megaphone muscles, and I do worry about that. I think Musk is one of the biggest threats to global democracy in the information spaces around at the moment. Anyway, that's enough from me. You guys take care, and let me know what you think about everything that's been said.